My guest today is one of the masters of jazz guitar and jazz education, Richie Hart. He has performed with some of the biggest names in jazz, including Ron Carter, Jimmy Cobb, Dr. Lonnie Smith, Don Patterson, Jack McDuff, Freddie Hubbard, Hubert Laws, just to name a few. And he is also a professor of jazz guitar at Berklee College of Music. Hey, Richie, welcome to the Nikhil Hogan Show.
It's nice to be on your show, Nick. Hope everything is going well with you.
Thank you so much. Let's get started at the beginning. According to your biography, you picked up the guitar at the age of 8 and decided you wanted to be a jazz musician at 14 after hearing Wes Montgomery. And then you attended Berklee College of Music at 18. Did I get the basic backstory correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yep. Exactly.
Now, what's interesting is you were really a great student. You received the Harris Stanton Award for Guitar Player of the Year in your final year as a student at Berklee. And I believe the previous winner was John Scofield, right, the year before?
Yeah, I believe so.
Could you just describe your level of understanding of jazz improvisation just before 1974 when you met George Benson?
I had been very proficient on the guitar at about 14, 15 years old as a guitar player. And as far as playing the guitar, I just played the guitar, but it was when I first heard Wes Montgomery when I was 14 that I realized that was the music I wanted to play. Now, fortunately, I had a teacher that liked jazz. He was not, top-ranked jazz musician, but he was a very good teacher and a very good musician. And he actually turned me on to Wes Montgomery. Unfortunately, at the time, when I was younger, there was not many people playing jazz. Everybody else was playing rock and roll. So I basically played by myself. When I was about 16 years old, I ran into another guitar player, which actually was a piano player, and later on became my roommate in college. And we formed a little band. So I had a little playing experience by the time I was 16. And at that time, I was playing professionally, mostly. So I did study a great deal on my own. I had my reading, had my ability together, but I never had a chance to actually play with really higher level jazz players. So when I went to Berklee, I was looking forward to being around, great players and great musicians. And when I got there, I didn't realize how my reading ability was and things, so I got rated very, very high in my semesters. And the first semester I was there, the very first ensemble I worked on, the second day of school, I look in class and I see these guys that they look like they're older than I am. And who walks in but Herb Pomeroy, Phil Wilson, Charlie Mariano. These were like the top teachers in the school. So I'm like, whoa, I'm in this ensemble? Yeah, and it was his B ensemble at the time, my first semester. So I started getting a lot more interest. It was a big band. And I started getting a lot more understanding of what it took to play jazz. However, going through school, I was playing with a lot of really good students and people that were good players, but I still was not actually playing with the caliber of musicians I later came to play with. So we were studying jazz and learning things. However, it wasn't until 1974 that I ran into George Benson in Boston. He was playing at the Jazz Workshop. And a guy I was studying with at the time, Jim Friedrich, we went down together and he introduced me to George. And when I was with George, he said, yeah, man, I've heard a lot about you. And he handed me the guitar and he walks around the room and everybody's watching me play. And he came back and he said to me, he says, yeah, man, I don't really teach. He said, but, I live down in New York. I live in the Bronx. If you're in town, give me a call. We'll get together. So little did he really know that I was from New York and I used to go back every weekend from Boston.
Right. So
I called him up the next week when I was back. He said, man, you down here? I said, I live down here. I said, I live half an hour from you. So anyway, I go into George Benson and, he's one of my idols. Wes Montgomery, George Benson, Kenny Burrell. Those were my three main influences.
Where was he at his career at the time?
At that time, he was recording for CTI Records.
Okay.
He had recorded Beyond the Blue Horizon for them. He did White Rabbit. He did Body Talk. And around that time, he had just finished Bad Benson. And that was his career. Just it was a couple of years, 2 years before he went to Warner Brothers and became, the big big pop star and very successful. But at the point, I could solo and improvise on all kinds of changes and all kinds of tunes, but I still was not getting the sound of jazz that I wanted to hear. There was something lacking. So we sat down, and actually before I got there, he was upstairs. He said, "I'll be down in a minute." And he had a book of violin music, and I could read practically anything in those days. So I'm down there reading the book. He runs down. He goes, "You're reading that?" I said, "Yeah, turn the page." And he's like mesmerized. And, he goes, "Man, what are you coming to me for lessons for if you can read that stuff?" I said, "Yeah, I can play this stuff, and I can read it, but I can't sound the way that you're sounding in Wes and Kenny Burrell. I just can't captivate that." So we sat down and played, and needless to say, I got annihilated completely. And
what were you guys doing? Do you remember the tunes you were playing?
No, it was just one tune. I forget what it was. It might have been something like Misty or one of those tunes like that. And I got completely annihilated, but I figured, well, this guy's one of my idols, I'm not going to be right in his category, but I didn't think I was get beat up so bad. So as we start, he asked me, he says, "Man, what's the name of this chord I'm playing?" So I said, "Well, that's a so-and-so chord." "What is this thing I played?" "That's a C major 7 arpeggio, etc." And I go on and on. All of a sudden, I start realizing he's asking me these questions because he didn't know the names of the chords he was playing.
So so wait a second. He's asking you, the schooled musician, for the things that he was playing.
Yeah, what was the names of them? And that completely annihilated me. Here I am. I know all this about the instrument, all kinds of theoretical stuff, and this man outplayed me 1,000 times more, and he didn't know any of this. And what happened was, when he showed me some things and some ideas and different stuff to do when I went home, and my head was spinning around. It's like, man, you have been doing all this time the wrong direction. I had really, really good technique. I had ability. I had really good ears, but nobody ever taught me that the ears and the fingers must be connected. It's not the brain and the fingers, it's the ears and the finger. And from that time on, I had a choice. Do I continue on this path and not get to where I want to go, or do I switch over? And I decided to switch over.
And just to be clear, Richie, so to set the stage, this other path that you were abandoning, are you talking about the so-called Berklee method, which has chord scales and harmony as they teach it in Berklee, based off the Joseph Schillinger system?
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm talking about. But see, it was not the same Berklee as going on now. They did not have these extensive chord scales going on. It was not part of the system. So the stuff I was learning there, I was learning a great deal of music from Phil Wilson and Herb Pomeroy and Tony Texera and the other teachers, but it was not on an improvisational side of it. So to give credit where credit's due, I did learn a lot from 4 teachers that were there in terms of musicality, playing jazz, but not the improvisation factor that I was looking for. So, needless to say, about 2 weeks later, I went down, took another lesson from him, and I played. And he looks at me and goes, "Man, what happened to you?" I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "You improved about 500%. And he goes to me, he says, you keep going like that, I'm not going to show you anymore." And, actually, George, we became great friends, really, really good friends over the years. But I practically everything I do in terms of my process is due to him. He was the one that woke me up and realized that, well, jazz musician is not this intellectual process of things. You can analyze it that way, but the actual playing of it has to do with working on your ears, vocabulary, connecting your fingers together, and being a very creative person, learning how to create with those skills.
And so you met George Benson in 1974 and started taking lessons with him up until the end of 1975. Were you doing about a lesson a week?
No, probably one every 3 weeks or whatever, sometimes 4 weeks, depending on when he was in town, because he was on the road a lot. Sometimes I get a lesson, like 2 weeks in a row, and then I wouldn't get one for 3 weeks, and then maybe I get another couple in a row. So it was on and off.
What kind of things would he ask you to work on?
Well, he never asked me to work on anything. See, George is really not really a teacher per se. He's more of I want to say, a person that gives you masterclass information. He would watch me do something, say, hey man, don't do it that way. And I say, why? He says, it doesn't sound good that way. And he explained, that, wow, you're overpicking notes if you play it this way, or don't use this particular thing. So he'd demonstrate. And in those days, there was no recorders. So everything that I had to do, I had to learn on the spot by ear. So the process of studying with him, besides all the information he gave me and all the great things that I saw him do, he made my ears have to step up to the plate, because fundamentally, he never took lessons. He just listened and go home and remember what he heard. So in that case, what I had to do is I had to drive home 35, 40 minutes and immediately sit down and remember what I was doing. So it put a whole different slant on the importance of what my ears truly were to the music.
Is George Benson's method, or rather his style of his approach, is that a lineage that goes back to someone like Charlie Christian?
Oh, it goes all the way back. It goes even further back than that. But generally speaking, Charlie Christian is the one that brought into American-based music the idea of building more interesting sounds based on different chords than the rhythm section is playing. So the rhythm section might be playing an F7 chord, and Charlie Christian would be playing something like a C minor off a C minor chord, A minor 7 flat 5 chord, another structure, not another scale, but another chordal structure. And that's he and Lester Young were the two first people that brought that into music, and then Dizzy and Bud Powell and Charlie Parker and Thelonious Monk. Well, actually, Thelonious Monk was there before the three of them brought that in and started taking it to a whole other level. And then it just kept evolving through the 40s and the 50s and the 60s of dealing with that same process.
Is it a simple concept, or is it something that is quite sophisticated?
It's simplistic complexity is what I call it. Most things in the world that are complex are based on simple things. In fact, our universe is based on atoms. We don't look at it and see it that way, but it's based on a basic principle. And the same idea with this is based on finding a different structure by looking at a chord and realizing that, well, these are other colors that can be played, and it formulates 3 or 4 more interesting notes, and those become our target notes. Now, one of the key factors behind this is the fact that music has not been diatonic for close to 300 years. It's been based on a 12-tone system. So once we have these 3 or 4 interesting new notes instead of the original chord, we now can apply approach notes and other notes moving to those as our target note. So we actually learn how to hear basically around triads and 7th chords and then embellish those.
We should contrast that, Richie, with the chord-scale system, so to speak. So that you just mentioned that was more of a newer thing that Berklee had started to introduce within the realm of improvisation. And that is kind of a newer concept over the decades in Berklee, where now you take a chord and then you give it a so-called chord scale, and that maybe is derived from modes or something like that. So what is the problem with thinking that way?
Well, the problem with thinking about that way is basically scales are perfect. Major scales, harmonic minor, melodic minor scales. They've been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. The purpose of the scale is to be able to learn the intervals, learn to hear different combinations, but basically to form harmonies. So any particular scale, like a major scale, has 7 7th chords and 7th triads in there, minimum. And it also has, as well, different inversions of those things. So fundamentally, what we're looking to do is when we're playing a song is connecting the harmonies together. Not what do you play on one chord out of time and what do you play on the next chord. So classically, going way, way back even to Bach's time, not even further, musicians would learn how to connect lines by how does each chord voice lead to the next chord, rather than just randomly playing whatever notes that they felt like. So the process is not playing vertical, but playing horizontal. So now, back to your original question. The idea is fundamentally like this. A scale is an alphabet. And within that alphabet, you have these other words that you can use. Now, if we take that in a language, would you take a book and say, well, it's the English language, or it's the Italian language, or it's the Japanese, and say, well, I don't need to read the book because now I know what the alphabet is that's here. So the purpose of the scale is to form different words, not to take a word and turn it back into an alphabet. So, that is a good fundamental principle. See, when I was at Berklee in 1971, we basically learned modes in like one quick thing. It's like, here's your major scale. You start from the second degree, it's a Dorian. Third degree Phrygian, okay? It's the same scale. It just starts from a different tonal center, different starting point. And the reason that came into being was to help musicians that didn't play harmonic instruments. Piano, guitar, organ, people that, like myself, came there and was already playing for, 10, 11 years of my life. We understood that if you have a C chord, these other notes are possible to be used. So you have trumpet players, trombone players, drummers. So this was an idea of helping them through ranging and harmony, that like these are other available notes from this particular mode that could be used. That was it. That was the extent of that we learned anything to do with those. But, now we have a worldwide system based on a chord symbol, and the chord symbol is God. Oh, look what I can put in the chord. What scale can I put on the chord symbol? As opposed as how can I expand this chord symbol in saying, oh, I got this chord symbol, but from a particular thing, I have these other chords that could be played.
You bring up a good point, because I remember when I was new to jazz at 18, and I went into my first jazz blues lesson, and the teacher said, all right, F7, so get your Mixolydian scale ready. And it did not sound like any jazz that I knew. When I was playing, it didn't sound like anything. I just felt like I was playing just a Mixolydian scale. What should I have done if I wanted to be good at the blues?
Number one, you should be listening to the vocabulary of the music. Each different type of music, whether you're dealing with rock, blues, country, folk, hip-hop, everyone has their own vocabulary. They are interconnected with different tools that we use, but they're unique vocabulary. So the key is you want to be listening to the language you want to study. So is there anything fundamentally wrong with somebody saying play an F Mixolydian scale? No. But that's just like saying, okay, here's the Japanese alphabet and make up whatever you want from this. How are you going to do that? You're not going to do it. You need to have a foundation of listening to the music you want, learning rhythmically how things are played, phrase-wise, where things are slurred, bent, picked, all those little nuances. So that way, when you do have a series of notes like another chord or a chord structure, you can actually make a phrase, a musical phrase. So if we're speaking, let's say, for example, English, we give somebody that's a foreigner the language and say, here's the alphabet, make up some words. So what they probably will do is take their language, put the letters together in a word that they might say in their language and say, well, I got words here. And people somebody speaking English will go, you don't have a word. Not correct. So you need to have a foundation in the field you want to play.
That's really interesting, Richie. And I remember you had like a collection of like tons and tons of people just playing a blues in F. And you just say, go listen to this, and just listen to all of that. And I do remember in the class, because I did take your class, your jazz ensemble was fantastic. We went through transcriptions, and we fingered them very carefully. How many transcriptions should one know?
Well, let's put it this way. Over my career right now, I've done 160 Wes Montgomery transcriptions, and probably another at least 400 or 500 by other artists as well. Now, does that mean that you need that many to start playing? No, what you actually need to do is learning the repertoire in depth of what's in those transcriptions. So, a lot of musicians will say, if you truly sit down and you really learn and you rip it apart and analyze and see what's going on with 10 really great solos, you'll get an idea of what you should be practicing and what you should be working on.
How would you analyze a solo by somebody such that it leads you to making your own lines?
Well, first of all, first thing I'd look at is how is his rhythmic phrases put together. In other words, somebody going repetitively, that's nice for an exercise, but it's not musical conversation. As opposed to if you had somebody go ba-doo-da-doo-dop, bop, ba-doo-ba-doo-dee-dop, dee-da-doo-dop, bop. That's a rhythmic phrase that's connecting different things together. Space. So I would be interested, first of all, let's say, we'll take it back and say we're going to do a blues, and the guy has 7 choruses or something. I'd incrementally look at how does he connect those rhythms so they become fluid. And then what I'd be looking at is saying, I know what the fundamental chords are that the rhythm section's playing on. What is he playing from? And start ripping apart and say, oh, this guy here, instead of playing F7, is playing on D minor. Ooh, over here he's playing on C minor. Ooh, over here he's playing on E flat major 7. And find this sounds good. If it's something that your ear equates to and likes the sound of it, now you're starting to learn that, like, wow, I like this sound. This is what we do to produce this sound.
Is it okay to use real books to learn standards, or how should someone learn a standard? And taking a blues, for instance, an F, let's just imagine if somebody didn't know anything about jazz and they were looking at many people playing different blueses. Do you want to standardize a blues form in terms of the chords when you're learning a blues, or do you, for each transcription, you want to make sure you know the rhythm section's harmony specifically?
Well, that's a good question. Fundamentally, you have to know the basic song. Okay? So blues becomes a little different than learning standard song, because the basic premise of blues is not just, the chord changes. It's the expression and the feeling of blues. Most people that play nowadays, they think they're playing a blues, and they have no blues notes. They have none of the actual blues phrasings that jazz blues players play. So step one is, what is the standard fundamental motion? Now, every blues is going to have a different melody, so therefore it's going to be a completely different process of what type of harmonies would be used to support that particular melody. Although you're playing an F blues, you have F7 as your first chord, somebody might be playing a different structure on the top to fit a melody note that might be there. So the bass player is the person in the band that holds down the original harmonic motion to the song. It's not the comper. It's not the soloist. The bass player takes care of this. So you need to hear what's going on the bottom structure, but you don't necessarily need to play on the bottom structure.
I guess to be technical, for instance, Charlie Parker's, when he's doing a blues, there are a few more different chords thrown in there. And are you very careful to make sure that you know that he's using additional chords in the head? And then when it comes to the solo, do those extra chords disappear, or would you still want to highlight, just have the basic blues when you get back to the soloing?
Yes, you want to know what the changes are that he added to the tune, but no. See, this is one of the misconceptions that people think. They think that every chorus, that the rhythm section and people are going to play the exact same changes. Harmony in music, whether you go back and listen to Bach, you listen to Beethoven, Mozart, harmony varies. Melody stays stationary. So harmonic motion in a particular piece can vary. So when you're looking at chord symbols, it makes people believe, well, this is the only chord that's played here. More like a pop tune rather than a jazz tune or a classical tune. A classical composer will take an 8/12 bar melody and write a 15-minute symphony on it. And meanwhile, you'll see the repetitions of the melody and the harmony and the embellishments of that melody change drastically. That's the theme and development aspect of what jazz is about, or classical music, both. So it's not That like the idea of like this is an F7 chord and we have our substitutions and we're going to play those. That chord can be blown away and somebody could put a different chord in place of it. So there's different levels of fundamentals. You can't all of a sudden have somebody go and do this. They need to be able to make the sound of an F7 chord first. So once they learn how to make that sound, they need to learn how to make the sound of an F minor chord, an F major 7 chord. So now when that idea of playing on that structure gets transposed to another key, they actually hear in the new key center rather than the center that the bass player is playing in. That's where the complex simplicity comes in.
On one of your records, there's a recording of you with Lonnie Smith. I believe it's called Live in New York City, 1981. And there's a recording of you performing Cherokee. Now, some people say 300 BPM is fast. And I think this recording is something like 400 BPM. So if you haven't heard it, please check it out. It's amazing. So when you're playing at 400, how do you think, and especially with a song like Cherokee, which has, for instance, quite a tricky bridge?
Well, the misconception is people think that great musicians, when they're playing, are thinking. We don't think. We practice and think. When we play, we train ourselves to react with sounds. Very similar in nature to the way anybody speaks a language. Person starts out speaking as a kid. He learns by listening. Eventually, he can put sentences together. Goes off to school, learns words. Now, the bottom line is, when you went to school and you started learning words, most people take spelling tests at the end of the week. How do you spell the word? What does it mean? Just because you've learned that intellectually does not mean it becomes part of your speaking vocabulary. There is a big break between that. Usually in education systems, the way it works is if you're in first grade and they're teaching you these words, most of the books you're reading have those words in that level of reading. So you start getting, the idea that like these things become part of your vocabulary. So music is exactly the same way. We study different sound, but just because somebody shows you something, it doesn't mean you're ready to play it. It has to be worked into your system where it can be done with a non-thought process. You can just react with the sound that you hear. So it doesn't really matter whether we're playing a ballad or playing extremely fast. You have to be able to hear what you play and have your fingers execute that. Just as we're speaking right here, I'm sure neither one of us are thinking about the spelling of the words, what words we're saying to express what we want to say.
Speak for yourself. I'm struggling with this language here. Mr. Eloquent. Okay. No, I want to ask you this. In addition to having a great ear for music, you are also a very accomplished sight reader. Now, can you give some tips on how to be a better sight reader? The guitar has the same note in several locations along the fretboard. And also, wasn't there a story you told of a famous professor at Berklee, you don't have to mention who he was, who demanded you sight read something from his book, and then when you just did it with no problem, he stormed out of the room?
Yes. He wrote a chart because I was not playing the instrument the way that he thought I should play the instrument. And he wrote this chart for this guitar ensemble. I had a lot of great players in it, and I used to play the first part because I was a good reader. And he puts the part in front of me like, I got you now you can't play this because you don't play my way. Well, I sight read through it, and he just like stormed right out because I had studied the method, and I'd actually taken clinic with Johnny Smith. But from the time I was a kid, my teacher had me studying Johnny Smith's diagonal layout to the instrument. So that's the way I learned how to play the instrument, from one end to the other. And that's the way I learned how to read. And that's how I started learning how to read in my positions, and I started learning how to connect those positions together in playing, so I connected them together in reading as well.
Okay, so you're recommending the Johnny Smith way.
Well, that's one of the methods that I started with. I didn't read diagonally from the beginning. I learned my scales and arpeggios and things like that from his method diagonally. But from reading, I learned my basic positions. But I learned as I was going on, you can play the notes in the position, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can get the correct phrasing. Now, one little thing might need to add here, guitar players are under this assumption that when you play a note, you pick every single note. Musicians don't do this on any instrument. They slur notes, they bend notes, they do not pick every single note. You're not hearing da 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 da. When you listen to Charlie Parker, he's not going da 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 da. He's going da 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 da. So, in position, there's going to be notes that you need to slur to make the phrase correct. That will work in that position. So now you have to learn how to connect other positions together to make so you can get that particular note to slur correctly. One of the reasons that guitar players, one of the reasons that guitar players very rarely get asked to play really complex jazz lines is because they don't articulate with the horns well. You'll see in most of the earlier recordings on Blue Note and all the main labels, you don't see a lot of guitar players playing lines with horn players. You see Wes Montgomery, you see Kenny Burrell, you see Jim Hall, you see George Benson, you see Grant Green. Those are the people you play that know how to actually articulate a horn line correctly.
Please, I want somebody who is a master to educate Jim Hall and Grant Green. Now, these are not people who are known for playing barrages of 16th notes. I think you also mentioned another story where there was Grant Green was being played by George Benson, and there was somebody in the room saying, "Why are you listening to Grant Green? He's not that great." And then George explained that he was great. So could you talk about these underrated players and why we should listen to them?
Well, those players are not really underrated. It's just that we have this new generation that came from more of a shredding mentality. In other words, they're excellent guitar players. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people that play the guitar well. But being a great guitar player and being a great musician are two completely different things. You can't mix those up. You know, the essence of music has rhythm, phrasing, feeling, expression, emotion, all these other things. You know, they're very, very, very important to the fundamental of any particular style. You know, you listen to a Jimi Hendrix. You hear Jimi Hendrix playing with distortion, but you don't hear him playing barrages of notes one after another, you know, filling up all the space. So it's a matter of the musical depth. See, fundamentally, everybody can listen to and hear music. It does not mean because you can hear music that you have a deep understanding of what makes really good music. The media has bombarded people for so many years with music that is very, very inferior. And in all genres, there's music that's great in all genres. I mean, you go back and you listen to a Frank Zappa, man, his music is really in-depth and very, very deep for the 60s. But yet he was accepted. He was accepted, you know, in the rock world. But his music, you know, he studied with Sibelius. And, you know, there's a difference between that and somebody doing a simple pop tune that has 3 chords that is nice and you know, clicky. It's got a nice little melody to it. But, you know, there's nothing wrong with that music. But just because you listen to that doesn't make that's the highest end of music you hear. And you don't also have to have the most intellectual thing. It's about the expression and the feeling and emotion.
I got a couple of quick questions to ask you. Do you tap your foot when you're improvising? I've heard Barry Harris excoriate people who tap on 2 and 4. I mean, what's your opinion on tapping your foot? I tap my foot, but sometimes I don't even tap my foot in time. I tap polyrhythms that I'm hearing. So I feel the pulse. The pulse to music has to be your internal clock. And number one, you have to have a steady internal clock, and then you hear different rhythmic sounds placed against that on a particular song. So, I mean, am I opposed to anybody tapping their foot? No, not if they do it well. But it's not a necessity to have to tap your foot, and it's not a necessity to have to tap it on 2 and 4, 1 and 3, or whatever. It's a necessity to have your internal clock so strong that when you're playing, you take a drummer, for example, like Steve Gadd, one of the great studio drummers. You know, he's not tapping his foot. The man has metronomic time and creative with it.
You put a click track on and give him the click track, turn it off. At the end of the thing, he's perfect with the click track because his interior metronome is that solid.
Do you practice with the metronome? I've heard some people, this is a controversial thing, some people say you have to, and some people say, yes, yes I do, but not always. Some people say no. So where do you stand on the metronome?
I think people that are learning to get their time together need to practice with the metronome all the time because they need that beat supplier. You know, the metronome can be a great thing or it can be a bad thing. If you rely on it for your beat all the time, now you're not really learning where you're supposed to be. Just because it clicks on each beat does not necessarily mean we just hear a beat. What we hear is we hear many subdivisions of the beat. Now, we were talking earlier about jazz. The misconception is that jazz music and American-based music is built on dot, 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 dot. It's not. It's built on triplets. Dot, 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 with leaving those out. Bop, 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 bop. That's where the feel comes in. So I play with the metronome, I have no feel. Well, that means you don't hear subdivisions of the beat. And that goes back to listening, talking about Jim Hall and Grant Green about like, wow, they don't play as many notes. Yeah, but the subdivision of the beat and the stuff they play is crazy. Where they place phrases is insane sometimes, how they make those work.
Now, do you hum or sing as you improvise?
A combination of a little bit of both. And hopefully not loud enough that it gets in anybody else's way hearing me do it. All musicians are doing that, whether some people have to do it internally because they're blowing a horn or not. Just they're basically feeling that pitch to come out. After all, it doesn't matter what instrument you're playing, it's a tool. The music comes from inside out of what you're feeling. So you try to get that out with your voice. Your voice actually, if you can use that to sing, helps you phrase better. Because you have to breathe when you're singing. That was the actual first instrument anyway. Thousands and thousands of years ago was the voice. So what you have is guitar players and people that play keyboard that don't breathe.
I actually didn't get your answer about the real books. Do you think real books are okay to use for learning standards?
To be honest with you, I hate them. I will not let a student ever use a real book. Because the real book has wrong melodies, has wrong harmonies, has wrong parts missing to the song, and it doesn't have the lyrics, so people don't know how to phrase the melody. And on top of that, one other little thing to add, I don't know if you understand this, but most people don't realize that by copyright law, chord symbols are not considered legal music. They're abbreviations. So if you're giving somebody, there's practically every tune in that book that I can point out that the chord symbol is wrong. It's put there to enhance the study of a chord scale. It's not put there because the composer intended what it is. A perfect example all the time is people play Stella by Starlight. In that book, they have E minor 7 flat 5 as the first chord. That's not what the composer wrote. If you listen to the original movie with the composer's theme, it's a B flat diminished major 7 chord. And people play it wrong all the time.
There's a story you also told where it was, and I don't know the circumstances around this, but it goes that you were in some sort of meeting with other guitar teachers discussing curriculum, and someone said, why are we teaching chords that are so underused, like a diminished major 7? Is that kind of like an example of how like jazz education is kind of drifting further away from its original kind of source?
There's plenty of great artists out there that have explained the same thing in the same way. That, one of the guys mentioned, are we doing injustice to educating jazz and musicians incorrectly? Everybody's learning all the same things, and they're all playing and sounding exactly the same way. Jazz was never intended for that. It was intended to be individuals, but played as a group. So everybody has their own individual idea. As you said about that, there's quite a few stories of people not knowing that, and people that are in very high positions that don't know what those chords are about. And one of the issues is the distinction between working towards being a professional and just working towards being a good amateur. And it's very, very strange how our world works. Everybody wants to get to the destination as fast as possible, but they don't want to do the work or take the journey in between to get there. So certain things that people teach, they get a fast result, but the result that they're getting is not really anything of importance. So you get somebody to be able to play on A minor really fast by giving them a Dorian scale, and they're playing the correct notes in the key, but they're not really saying anything. So these are issues. Getting back to the thing, there's many, many musicians out there that will say the same type of stuff that I say over and over, but people don't want to listen to what the real professionals have to say. They would much rather follow the quick path, and they think it's a quick path. So, fundamentally, we have a mixture of these people that can play their 20 songs really well, and they think they're professional and they know what they're doing. No, they just worked out their basic thing, and they play the same thing every time. That's not what jazz music's about.
Should you practice a tune in all 12 keys if you want to be a great jazz musician, or should you focus on sounding good in a single key first?
Single key first, and there's plenty of songs. People doing this all the time that sound horrible in many, many keys. There are certain tunes that sound good. There is no song that sounds good in all 12 keys. So to waste your time learning keys by doing that, why wouldn't you just learn a song that's written, let's say, in the key of D flat, rather than taking something that when you move it to D flat becomes so dark sounding that it loses the effect of the lyrics and the melody and the harmony of the song.
So, like for instance, your Cherokee that you were playing, have you practiced that in many keys, or do you want to get it really good in the standard key of B flat?
Well, I practiced it originally to get in the key of B flat. I can play it in whatever key. Keys are not an issue when you can play. It doesn't really matter what key I'm in. It matters, can I hear what I want to play? The fact of mastering keys, if you do it correctly, doesn't take a lot of time. However, for guitar players, it can take 10 lifetimes because they actually learn how to play they learn how to play like 15 fingerings of every scale, which is ludicrous. It becomes the most ludicrous thing in the world. I'm going to learn every possible combination in existence of how to say an alphabet. But if you haven't learned any words, what good are all those combinations?
Okay, next question is, as an improviser, how are you different today as compared to 20 years ago?
Oh, every day I get more and more different. Because what happens is my ears change. Over time, my ears hear more and more things. From listening to music, transcribing, and just paying attention to things, I hear a new way to do something. So comparatively to like the recordings with Lonnie Smith, I listened to those and I said, man, I was really playing nice and really, really great. I wouldn't want to play like that right now because that's not who I am. I've changed a lot of things since then and learned more tools, more skills to add to what was going on. It was perfect for that time. But I learned from the past, but I try not to keep my playing in the past.
It was very interesting how you were actually tying this to classical music. It almost, to me, when you're saying how to voice lead from chord to chord, that sounds a lot like figured bass to me and counterpoint. And I want to get your reaction to some very interesting developments in classical music education in recent years. There has been kind of an explosion of interest in classical improvisation, thanks to the emerging fields of partimento and also figured bass. I remember you in your ensemble, you mentioned a story of Bach improvising fugues, and it really got me thinking about the parallels between classical music and jazz. You're a great improviser. Do you ever listen to classical music and hear things that you find a commonality in?
Oh, sure. I mean, I've studied immensely. I mean, Bach, Debussy, Ravel, all those composers. I especially Bach, I took apart. I played every one of his partitas, everything he practically ever wrote. I played that on the guitar and worked on. That's how I learned a lot of the chord voicings and a lot of things that I use all the time come from things that Bach did. His use of spread voicings in writing for violin and piano. his use of connecting chords. That was the whole idea behind Bach. Although he didn't use many chords out of the key, he would use diatonic chords and not just run up and down the chord structures. He would be able to move from chord to chord by using certain notes of the connection to get to the next chord structure to make a melodic line. That's where our harmony for American music came from. The African American had the blues, had the rhythm, had the feel, and they didn't have the harmony. So the best way to study harmony for them, they didn't have school, is to listen to musicians like that and adapt and find out what are some of these structures they're playing. And they would actually learn from the structures and adapt those structures.
Barry Harris said something that, in his opinion, he said that jazz is kind of a continuation of classical music. What's your reaction to a statement like that?
I think it's right. It's in essence of the harmonic approach of the music, but not in terms of the actual rhythmic and an expression of it. You know, in terms of jazz music, it basically comes from African rhythms. That's what makes jazz the way it is the African rhythm. Now, the harmonic approach, there's a direct correlation between the harmonies that were added to jazz and classical music. And there was a point in time where all of a sudden some of these harmonies that came from jazz started filtering back into contemporary classical music as well.
I have some fun questions to end off the interview, but I want to give you like a good 3 to 4 minutes or 5 minutes to just lay out the theoretical concept behind how someone should improvise jazz music. And I want to leave the floor to you for a couple of minutes and just so you can really, because there are a lot of competing ideas about jazz education and methods, modes, chord scales. So I want to hear your theory and the way you teach. And you can be technical. You can talk about chords and you can talk about things.
Well, fundamentally, you have to love the music you want to play. People come to jazz, they play jazz because they think if they play jazz, they can play any other music and that they're a better player. That's baloney. I know a lot of people that play jazz that are terrible, and I know a lot of rock players that are great musicians. Okay? So, number one, are you coming to the music because you listen to this and you have a passion to want to play this music? That's step one. Because if you don't have the passion, you're not going to have the determination and the drive to do the amount of work that it takes to become a really great improviser. You're talking about tens of thousands of hours to work on stuff to be able to do it. So, number one, do you love the music you came to? I came to this because when I heard Wes Montgomery, it sparked this thing into me, and this is what I want to do. And that happened to him with Charlie Christian, happens to many people. Happens in rock, blues, anything. You have to have the passion to begin with. Number one. Number two, you have to listen to that music all the time to absorb the sounds. The next step is when you're learning, you have to sit down and figure out the song. The improvisation is secondary. That's your theme, your development of your theme. So if you don't have a basic, strong version of your melody and your theme, how are you going to be able to improvise? All you're going to be doing is playing the same patterns on any series of chord changes and not accommodated to the particular song you're playing. So, number one, do you have a melody really strong? Do you know actually the lyrics to this melody if you're dealing with a popular standard? So you can phrase that melody and make it sound unique to the way that you want to say it. Number two, have you studied the harmonic motion? You mentioned before figured bass. The system I teach is very similar to that idea of looking at your melody. Your melody is soprano. You look at the basic root motion of the structure. That's your bass in the bottom. And then you fill in your alto and tenor sounds of that structure. And you work from there. That gives us the foundation of our original tune. And then from there, you start learning how many notes can you modify of the notes that fit in the melody. Once you have that, then you're looking to say, oh, can I do a chord melody of this particular thing? And actually voice lead the chords really smoothly. When I do, what are some of the new chords that I come up to be that's on the top of the chord? So just because it's an F major 7 chord and you put the notes on the top of it, it does not necessarily mean the chord on top is F major 7. It might be A minor 7. It might be it might be C major 7, might be another structure. So that's the next level. So once you have that, now you have new information at which to start training your ears to hear new melodic sounds. So from listening, you're trying to pick up on what is the rhythmic, phrased rhythm way we speak to each other. We don't speak to each other by da 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 da. Okay, that's exercising. I mean, people can play that really fast. And man, that guy plays the guitar great. Yeah, but it's not music. So back to that original rhythm, feeling rhythm. A melody has a rhythm to it. There are correct ways to play a melody rhythmically, and there are incorrect ways. When you have the lyrics, it'll tell you, oop, that doesn't sound good because I broke that word up. I broke that phrase up. So that gives you a more in-depth detail of how to play lyrically, which is the things you hear people saying, man, that guy's a very lyrical player. That's what the guitar players that I mentioned earlier are. They're very lyrical. So with that in mind, once you have that, then you start moving into your ideas of your chord. So now you're connecting and saying, well, I have a particular structure here. How do these notes move correctly to my next structure? And you'll find out that any triad you want to play, your 7th chord, the notes will have to adhere to moving no farther than a minor third in either direction. Most of them are always going to move to a note that's a half step, a common tone, or a whole step up to accommodate that new structure. So now, instead of I've gone from knowing what I can play in this chord, now I've come to how do I connect from chord number 1 to chord number 2, to chord number 3, to chord number 4. How does my line, like the melody, fluidly move to the song and not become disjointed? That's one of the fundamental processes that all my students that work with me have to go to get to the more advanced type of things. But that's your foundation of actually starting with a theme. Music has always been the same thing in classical music. There is a theme, and you develop that. When you take out your melody, your lyrics, and forget that, you no longer are actually playing music.
Can I ask a quick minor question? When you talked about that F major 7, you're talking about maybe superimposing that A minor 7 with the G. Does that G, all those upper extension notes, do they have to be diatonic to that chord? Or are you thinking about options that could possibly be not related to that key?
Well, it comes down to the two functions of chords. Every chord structure functions two ways. It functions as a tonic, which means it's a landing place, so you want things to land that would vertically be okay. Or it's a dominant, which means it's moving, so things do not have to fit on the particular chord structure because they're moving you to the next place. One of the issues, everybody learns chord scale. They learn in stop time on each chord. They do not hear the forward flow. So, this note is wrong. Well, this note is not wrong if you're listening into in time where it's moving to next. We don't hear music, and we don't play music vertically. We play it horizontally. So your question is, if you can hear a particular pitch on that chord structure moving, and it's a moving chord, it works fine. Plus the fact that any chord can have any particular note played on it. It means whether it's a landing point or not. So the ones that you place as your chord on the top is your tonic notes, and then you can place other notes to pull you to those notes. So you have that A minor on top. You have basically A, C, and E. Those are notes you can play. However, I can play G sharp to A. I can play B to C. I can play B to A. I can play D to C. I can play D, D flat C. I can combine all those as long as they resolve to those new tonic structures of that new chord structure.
So you're really thinking of chords, but in a figured bass way, voice leading chords in movement horizontally.
Right.
Okay. That's great. That's fantastic. Well, I mean, I can't help but ask you a couple of fun questions just to end off. These are hot seat, rapid fire, all in the name of fun. Are you ready?
Sure.
Top 3 saxophonists. Go.
Top 3 saxophonists: John Coltrane, Charlie Parker, Lester Young.
Top 3 trumpet players.
Freddie Hubbard, Lee Morgan, Louis Armstrong.
Top 3 piano players in jazz.
Top 3 piano players: Wynton Kelly. This is a hard one because I love so many piano players. Wynton Kelly, Bud Powell, and it's kind of hard for me to pick the next one because, as I said, there's so many. Wynton Kelly, Bud Powell, and McCoy Tyner.
Top 3 drummers.
Top 3 drummers: Jimmy Cobb, Art Blakey, and there's another hard one because I played with so many great drummers that I love. Probably Art Taylor.
Top 3 bassists.
Paul Chambers, Ron Carter, and Ray Brown.
All right, here we go. Top 3 guitarists.
Wes Montgomery, Kenny Burrell, and George Benson.
If you could time travel and play music with anyone in history, who would it be?
Anyone in history? Probably be able to play with John Coltrane.
Top 3 classical composers.
Bach, Debussy, and another hard one, Beethoven.
If someone wanted to hear your music, what's the first album of yours they should listen to?
Remembering Wes.
Well, Richie, it's been such a pleasure for me to talk to you about music today. I really think you're a complete master, and you're a great teacher too. So I think if students are lucky to work with you, they should be really thankful to have such a fantastic teacher. Before we end, please tell my listeners how they can contact you, your website, maybe buy your albums, get in contact with you, and mention some things that you have in store for the rest of the year.
Okay, you can contact me on my website. If you go to heartjazz52@gmail.com. My new website should be up within the next month. My old one is still there, so you can find contacts and see things on there. But my new one is being updated. I have 12 different CDs and albums out. My last few that I've done, 5 or 6. There's Quiet Conversations. There's Thoughts Alone. There's In a Mellow Tone, 33 and a Third, 45 Lives. My last 2 that came out on vinyl with CD is Introspection, and we have a re-release on vinyl, which actually comes with CD as well, of Remembering Wes with Ron Carter, Jimmy Cobb, Dr. Lonnie Smith, and a whole bunch of other great musicians playing on that. As far as what my plans are, I'm still teaching. I still do a lot of online lessons on FaceTime and clinics, as well as I'm still teaching at Berklee and teaching classes there online right now on Mondays and Tuesdays. So if anybody's interested in learning, especially about Wes Montgomery or George Benson, or learning about how to play jazz, just give me a call. Just check me out on, once again, heartjazz52@gmail.com.
Fantastic. Well, Richie, thanks so much for being on the Nikhil Hogan Show.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on here. It's nice to be on your show. And hopefully you have some good listeners, and it'd be nice to get some feedback from what they had to say.
Wonderful. See you later, Richie. Bye.
Bye now.